Hello folks, my name is Jim Worthen. The show is Worthen One-on-One. We're here on Channel 17 every Monday at 2, Wednesday at 5, and Friday at 7. And they don't have enough programming, or they like my show. They plug us in probably each week 3 or 4 more times, maybe 1 in the morning or something. I did have a maintenance guy say, I saw you this morning at the post office a couple of months ago. I said, this morning? He said, yeah, 5 o'clock. I saw you on Channel 17. Okay. Now there's, as I always mention, there's 3 other platforms for those who don't get Channel 17, your friends and family here and across the world. One is Michael Nicholson's Facebook page. The other is TVSB website. Go to the demand section and all the way to the bottom. And would you believe they say I'm at the bottom because it's Worthen One-on-One and it's the alphabet. I know they're just using that as an excuse to put me the last one. And you can go to YouTube, search Worthen One-on-One. Again, as I said, if you're seeing us on Channel 17, the reason for me telling you that is, for instance, our topic today covers things in the state, but mainly elections in Santa Barbara County. Well, Santa Barbara Channel 17, the live show is, just on the South Coast, and a lot of people have disconnected, but they still can pick us up on the internet. More than that, they can say, I saw this show and it gave me some information. Aunt Joan in Santa Maria, or even Aunt Joan in Sacramento. So it's something that can be spread. I one time had a guy call me. He said, I saw your show today. And I said, wait, I thought you were in Europe. He said, yeah, I was in Paris. And I watched your show on the internet. Our friend Bill Pintard once had a father call him after he was on my show, and he was in Chicago, and he said, my son's applying to play for the Foresters this year, and I was really impressed by you on that show on TVSB. So you never know. You just never know where you're reaching, and so please spread the word. Now, of course, my granddaughter has embarrassed me. She said, Grandpa, that's on the internet. You're going to be there forever. And I said, really? What's wrong with that? She said, well, 200 years from now, your great-great-great-granddaughter is going to be as embarrassed by you as I am. She swears she didn't say that, I made it up. But when I make something up, yeah. The show today is focusing on elections, and I have a real expert. Goes back for years, back to when we had great concern in Santa Barbara County of dead voters. The kids weren't dead, but the way the registration works, if they register now and then graduate and haven't registered somewhere else, they can be getting ballots in Isla Vista for 4 to 6 years easily. There was a federal court case, and I told Bobby I would go into this. A federal court case, and the federal court decided in LA County that there were over 1 million dead voters that just weren't there anymore. Many had died. Others had moved away, but the systems, if they moved to Nevada, they aren't interfaced, so they could be voting in Nevada and still be getting ballots in Southern California. So times have changed, and Bobby is really up to date on this to tell us how they've changed and how clean, really, our elections are. My guess is Bobby McGinnis. Julie Balloff. I've had a hard day. I kept talking to Bobby, our chairman, who is somewhere else completely. Julie is, and I've educated the audience, and I'll briefly say again, you are secretary to the Republican County Central Committee.
That's correct.
And the Republican County Central Committee is a legal body under state election laws. The Democrats have one, the Greens have one. Right. I don't know if the communists still qualify, but they each have their own section of the election code. And so we have our section and our duties as a Central Committee in Santa Barbara County. And we have to stand for election. Each 4 years in the presidential election, we have to take out papers. We have to go around and get 40 signatures of people, and in our case, they have to be Republicans who want us to be on the ballot to come back on the Central Committee. So it's a real lesson in humility when I knock on a neighbor's door and say, I'm Jim Worthen, and I'm running for Central Committee. Who are you? What's that? And so you have to spend time. Luckily, the De Loreto family lives across the street, and between the kids and the wife and the husband, I was able, a few years ago, to get 6 signatures in that house. So you can kind of think of us, because we also run by districts, the supervisorial districts, each has an amount of members based upon the previous gubernatorial election, and they reapportion us. And so you can think we're almost like, what we do is almost like running for Santa Barbara City Council. The same kind of rigmarole that they have to go through, we have to go through. Frequently, there's no opposition. In the second district supervisorial district, we had our full 5 members file, and another lady filed. And she beat one of our members. She came in 5th, and a longtime member who just didn't do anything. We just thought he's been there so long, and he has a great name. He'd been chairman of the, what's that group?
I can't remember the name of it right now.
Yeah, the civil grand jury. He was chairman of the civil grand jury at one time. Okay. Been on our ballot on our committee for 20-some years. That's what elections do. He was retired. So think of us as the governing body for the Republican Party, with dictates from state law and our bylaws to run the Republican Party's operation in the county of Santa Barbara. Mm-hmm. Now, one of our biggest organizations is a Republican club with, I think, well over 100, maybe 150 members. That's a volunteer organization. So there are other people who can say, this is the Republican Kids Club. They can, they are supposed to ask us for permission, but we've never told somebody they couldn't be a volunteer Republican group. So when you hear, I'm with the Republican Club, it's not the Republican Central Committee. Although the chairman of the club, Ed Fuller, is also the caucus chairman. That 2nd District group gets together in caucuses of the 2nd District Republican Central Committee. But there's a caucus in each of the 5 supervisorial districts. They range in from 5 to 3 members, depending again on the population vote in the previous gubernatorial election. Did I do okay, Julie?
You're going down quite a road of information there. It's something very interesting. I didn't realize what the Central Committee was until about 10 years ago, and I think there's something called Political 101 that should be taught in our schools, because most people still can go decades and not know what the Central Committee is and what they do.
You're taking us down a very important road, because the same thing has happened today. Finally, what happened when I was young and in politics and went to work for Senator Bob Lagomarsino, the U.S. Supreme Court in 1963 ruled that you couldn't have a federal system. Now, a federal system was like U.S. Senate, represents states, no matter how big, only two senators. We had a federal system of our state senators were elected by county. And the first paid job I ever had in politics was helping Bob Lagomarsino get elected against the Santa Barbara Senator Al Weingart, and Bob was the Ventura senator, and they had to go head to head in that reapportionment, and we killed him. No, but we were the only senators that ended up against each other, and there were many in this state, that the senator was beat in his own county. Bob Lagomarsino got 65% of the vote in Ventura County. That would have put us over. He got 62% here. So I was proud of that campaign. It was all, Senator, what do you want me to do? Well, Jim, here's what you do today. I wasn't the brain trust.
Well, I did want to point out, too, that we are all volunteers.
Yes.
And nobody is paid, and for the number of hours that go in, especially the year of an election, it's almost a full-time job. I know it is for some people. They're putting in way over 40 hours a week, and many nights, many weekends.
As an example, as you know, we ended up with nonpartisan offices on the November ballot. Well, it's our job to find Republicans in those nonpartisan offices or a acceptable decline to state. We can't endorse Democrats or Peace and Freedom or any of those other strange people.
Our fellow Americans.
Yeah, I wonder sometimes. Anyway, we ended up finding 82 people for those 90 offices.
There were 99 open seats, and we really went to work on it, and I have to hand it to our chair and the committee, because that's a lot of people to find to run in those seats. Not all of them had candidates. There were about 12 that nobody filed papers on. They'll probably be appointed down the road. But we actually found over 80 candidates to run, and of those, over 40 of them, 41 or 42, did not have anyone file against them, so they have already won.
Well,
and we are so thrilled about that.
Yeah, well, that's part of this new one man, one vote. Just this year, finally, that 1963 Supreme Court decision has reached, and they weren't hiding from it, it's just the rulings have come down. So the city of Carpinteria for the first time is by districts. The Santa Barbara School Board is by districts. I could go through all of them.
It's had an amazingly good and more complicated and more simplification at the same time, because I found out from the election office that when I was going through the logic and accuracy testing, which is another process that they go to make sure that the ballots will be counted correctly.
Yeah, you had an amazing number.
There are 307 different ballots just for our county.
Yeah,
and that is partially because of all these small districts, which do allow smaller candidates with less money to actually get in, because instead of having, for example, in the Goleta Unified School District, there's 58,000 voters. And you used to have to reach all 58,000 if you were a candidate.
Hard to walk that, yeah.
Now, some of them are around 11,000. That makes it a hugely different operation of reaching out, of economics, of the whole process. So
11,000.
It's amazing.
11,000, a candidate that knew they were on the ballot in April could literally knock on every door before November 8th.
Yes, and we have seen such a surge in volunteers and the ability to make the districts small, and in many cases we're dividing up the walking districts by elementary school districts because people are so familiar with that, and it just makes people want to get out and do something when they realize I can reach my neighbors in my neighborhood. I don't have to reach the entire county.
Can I say something kind
Sure.
of negative about our opponents?
Uh-oh.
The reason there were 40 that won the election without being on the ballot is they were, like, I'll use San Ynez Union High School District.
Okay.
And it had always been vote for one of these people, and they did 3 this year, 2 in the next election, and this time they ended up in districts. Now, the left, the liberals, the progressives must all live on the same mountain somewhere because they didn't have anybody in these new open districts, and they wouldn't leave their mansions and come down to the
But it did make it a very interesting new game.
Yeah.
And it's not a game, but it made the playing field much more complicated to find a viable candidate in the right district that was having an election this year, because not everybody is elected each election cycle.
For
And
instance,
so it
3
was
this year, 2
complicated.
next year. and-
Right, right. In fact, on my ballot that I got, I was like, wait a minute, I'm not voting for anybody locally or anything locally. There's nothing, no school board measures, no candidates that are local as far as sanitation, water, city council. I'm just in a district that doesn't have any elections this year,
Well, except for
as far as the local.
the statewide,
Very interesting.
locally, Stoker and Brad Allen.
Right, but that's a higher level.
So as I say, I think there's just the progressives are so elite, and not just in San Ynez, but everywhere, that we got a lot of open districts that we got people into.
Well, we got
because-
a lot of mad parents too, and people who are very, very upset with the direction that so many things are going from the local level to the top. And they really are afraid that if they don't get involved and do something, that the America they knew and grew up in will not at all be there for their children. And then what the children are not learning in school and what they are learning in school has motivated a tremendous amount of people to come out and be involved. And we're just thrilled with the numbers of people that are involved.
And in that number of people waking up to what's going on around them, we, as a conservative party, see bond issues, and we know they passed bonds because they were, voting across districts, and they still are. And then we see the train to nowhere, and $6 billion, and they haven't been able to build a mile of it.
But they've taken some of the land already of the farmers.
And then we
it's
have
just
people who say,
sitting there.
wait a second, we passed this big bond issue for Santa Barbara, for instance. The only thing I've really seen is we got a new football stadium. And, we needed to improve the stadium, but we also, the boiler at Santa Barbara High keeps going out. And I think they finally took some of the money and took care of that, but,
There needs to be, I went to Santa Barbara High School, and I was just at the All Dons reunion last weekend and the weekend before, and we had a wonderful time. It was great to see it again. But absolutely, maintenance is a huge part of what our children need to be in safe and maintained facilities. And when, for example, my father served on one of the oversight audit committees, and he thought that he would be going for Santa Barbara City College to be involved as the money was being spent. And he found out that he was simply there to rubber stamp afterwards how the money had been spent.
what the bureaucrats said to do with
that
it.
wasn't at all. And I come from a construction background, And we built many buildings at UCSB, Cottage Hospitals, Santa Barbara City College, banks, industrial places. I know about.
What was the name of your company?
J.W. Bailey
Yeah.
Construction.
When I was young in real estate, that was the biggest local construction country.
Thank you.
And the nicest people.
Well,
Your dad,
my dad is still around, and
I think you may have been running around as a
I was
taller-
12 when they put me to work.
Yeah,
So that was
I'm
amazing.
sure when I came to your dad's office to talk about this real estate or something, you were getting in the way.
We flooded out a few times too when it was pretty funny down there. But as far as the schools go, to have a safe and clean and well-maintained building, and when the voters have put out the money for it in a bond issue, that money needs to be properly spent.
Well,
and we see as construction people, I mean, I have ideas about how public works projects should be bid, how it would improve the entire process. I have a lot of ideas from what I've seen and how I've seen things go wrong. So I think one of the things would be to definitely have the audit committees involved from the get-go. But that's getting a little bit off the track of elections right now.
Yeah, to kind of tie the bow on that, that's why a large faction, if I am persuasive, of the 21 members of the Central Committee come out against every tax increase and every bond, no matter where, no matter why. And the reason is, all of a sudden we realized we're passing bonds, and the money was fungible, could be moved around, and while we're not getting the bond work done, administrators' salaries went up to $300,000, $400,000. Teachers' salaries became an average of $90,000 in Santa Barbara County.
It is hard to understand some of the administrative salaries that are going on. I think that the public world versus the private world, and where in the public world the risk is not there, that is there for the business owners. And having had to meet payroll, we were a union company, week after week after week, and knowing the penalties that were put on us if we didn't meet the IRS or state dues or payments that were due, or the union payments or supplier or whatever, and to see how government does not have those same conditions and consequences, and they just can spend more than they take in, it's just maddening. And I really think sometimes that it would be good to have private business oversight committees who actually run the public departments, where you bring in someone who actually knows what it is to have to live within your means.
And know the timeline on construction.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
we get penalized if we don't meet the deadline. There are liquidated damages per day.
Government administrators say, oh, mañana. I'm sorry, Hispanics, Latinos.
No, well, Spanish is just great. I think I appreciate much of that in this community.
I always start the show out with where were you born and a little bit about you, but we've already covered a lot. But where were you born?
Here in Santa Barbara. I'm
Went
a
to
Santa
Barbara
Barbarian.
Public Schools, even with a rich family in construction.
Rich is another terminology. A family that became successful through my dad's 80-hour-a-week work weeks. Yeah.
Oh, he only worked.
Started with nothing. So, yeah.
Well, God bless him and you.
Thank
Let's talk about the condition that a lot of people are concerned about, and that's the ballot. And do you want me to start with the federal court order, or did I already cover that?
You talked about it a bit. You can continue. I don't know where you want to start regarding this election.
I want you to start with when you first were asked to go out to Isla Vista and...
Oh, I became involved in politics before Obama, while Obama was running, and I read a book called Obama Nation by Jerome Corsi. and it scared the hay out of me. So I started looking into where that would take this country and the road we would go down. So I got involved with the Republican women and ended up being president. And then I met Bobby McGinnis, who is now chair of the Republican Central Committee. And we ended up working very well together, and I'm now secretary. But it was a process where I also became a poll observer through the Election Integrity Project founded by Linda Payne. And then I started being a poll worker. And it was my experience at UCSB watching the students, and at that time we had 4 precincts together of freshman students, 4,000 of them, and watching the laws that were broken, the students that were voting multiple times, right? They would just go from one precinct to the next. Voting as someone else, because
a friend's ballot.
The names of each person in the precinct were posted outside the door, and every hour on the hour you mark off who has voted. So they would just go find a name and go up there, and we have no photo ID required at all. And everybody in the dorm had the same address, so they would say the name and the address, and they got to vote. And watching that happen, watching my inspector that was in charge of my precinct, all the precinct workers, what she did not know, the laws she did not follow, the wanting us to sign under penalty of perjury that we had tallied and gone through the ballots at the end of the night, the surrendered ballots, the voided ballots, the duplicated ballots, that you get so many when you start, you have to account for all of them, and at the end of the night you have to figure out what you used, and it needs to balance. And she didn't do that at all and wanted us to sign a document that we had done that under penalty of perjury, and I refused. So we ended up spending an extra hour going through it and doing it, and I ended up working with her the next election cycle. She thought I was great, so she gave it all to me to do, but she was still the inspector. And
so it wasn't corruption, it was lack of ability, really.
No, there was intent in there. She thought that it was just fine. The penalty of perjury meant nothing, and it was just fine to throw everything in the box willy-nilly and send it back to the election headquarters for them to deal with it. I felt that was a travesty and a dereliction of duty. And I also realized she absolutely, positively could not add. There was no way she was capable of doing the job. And I realized that it's an extremely difficult job to be a poll worker. You are there at least by 6:30, if not 6 in the morning. You don't leave until 9 or 10 at night. By the time you get into the afternoon and you have looked at how many people and done how many things, and you start to maybe make a few mistakes, you've got a lot of people who are very tired at that point. So it's a very difficult job, and we need all the help we can get of really capable, competent people. And the training, I'll just go into it, that our county staff at the election office, they're terrific. I mean, they are really working hard to follow the rules that are in place and do the best they can do. And I'm in there and work with them, but they have a very hard job. And the rules they have to follow are not what I would call, or even some of them would call, appropriate, fair, but they're what has come down from Sacramento.
I've talked to Secretary Holland, and I know you and Bobby have talked to staff. Some of the things we object to are dictated to them by the state law.
Absolutely.
They can't.
No, you don't have maneuvering room.
For instance, they can't count all the ballots like we'd love and have an answer in 2 days. They have some things they can't even count or announce till the 15th day, and that's state law.
There are certain things that happen where I remember my mom coming home from working election board, And sometimes she'd get home at 11, and sometimes it'd be 2 or later in the morning. And I remember one time she came home and she said, "That woman can't count." And she was like, oh my gosh, we had to recount, because you used to have to count all the ballots.
Make sure all the ballots are either there or destroyed.
You counted who got the votes, and then you sent it into the election headquarters. They tallied everything from the precincts, and they had the answers like that. Not now.
I used to go to election headquarters every election, and ballots would be coming in, and I'd be seeing how we were doing. And a question which you can't answer today is, where are they from? Has Isla Vista come in yet? You know, are those rural precincts? You know,
well, you get it from the precincts, but so few people are voting at the polls now. Most people are turning their ballots in by mail or taking them to the drop boxes, or whatever they're doing. Sometimes they take them to the election voting places and put them in the box, but they're still in the envelope. So there are different means and different processes that have to be followed for each of those ballots, and what order they get counted. If you haven't taken a tour of the election office, they are more than willing, not now, but after this election, to take groups of people through and show you what they do to verify that your ballot is yours, and to count it and to store it and to safely keep it until election night. It's quite an amazing process, but I think that would be definitely worthwhile for everyone to go through.
We are, and every candidate on the Republican conservative side says, vote now. The minute you get your ballot, vote.
Yes.
And we've had people over the years, in fact, Brooks Firestone and Kate Firestone 2 years ago said, oh no, we want to go vote on election day. We're used to that. And I saw Brooks the other morning, and he says, oh, we're finishing our ballot and mailing them in. And so the reason, tell us 2 or 3 reasons why you should vote conservatives. You liberals put it on the desk and do it in a few years. Yeah. Why should people vote immediately? Give us a couple of reasons.
This has been gone through to a great extent, and I'm going to say in California, which has very different laws than many of the rest of the states in the nation, the GOP has looked at this. There are substantial...
That's GOP, a Republican.
Yeah, the California GOP has looked at this, and we have figured out that it does benefit us definitely to make sure that people get their ballots in as early as possible. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Number one, life happens. I mean, things happen, someone gets sick, your car breaks down, whatever, it happens.
On election day.
On election day. And number two, it seems as we get closer and closer to the election, and this happened in the recall with Gavin Newsom, the Democrats and the media keep putting out the message that the Democrats have already won. And we have Republicans who think that their vote won't count, so they don't even bother going to the polls. They think, oh, what does it matter? Well, I am telling you, this election, it matters. It matters hugely. We have such an ability to change things in our county, in our state, and in our country. We need every person to vote, and to vote intelligently, and we have places where you can go and see who we recommend, from the propositions to the
Republican
judges.
Website.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we are saying, get your ballot in. If you take it into the election office, fantastic. If you mail it, okay. If you put it in a drop box, okay. Just get that dang ballot in so it's counted. And people might not know that every single ballot that is mailed to you, that envelope has a tracking code on it, and when you mail your ballot back, there is a barcode where it can be tracked that it
That's
is
the
being
envelope that gets thrown away after they count.
Is tracked that you are mailing your ballot back. Very interesting how this new world of tracking everything works.
So you, if I, which I did, gave them my ballot the day after Columbus Day,
Okay.
and I can literally, after 2 or 3 days, track exactly where my ballot has gone.
You can go to the Secretary of State website and track your ballot, yes.
And if, for instance, I met with a rather large Republican donor, and he was very upset that at his ranch, his wife had got the ballot, but he hadn't. Well, this has happened with my son, except my son's ballot goes to a post office box where mine does. But my son moved to Lompoc, registered his car, and oh wait, he gets a Lompoc ballot, just as if, well, this gentleman, what happened was he had a business in Los Olivos, their ranch is in San Ynez. Ballot went to Los Olivos to his address, except in Los Olivos, you don't get mail at your address. It goes to a post office box, and if he didn't have a post office box on it, he didn't get it. He had to go into the county to get his ballot.
Well, I just talked to a gentleman this morning, and he was concerned because his name had changed on his ballot, and he didn't know why. And I said, did you renew your driver's license recently?
Yeah.
And he said yes, and he has a different name on his driver's license. It's similar, but it's different. And he said, I didn't go in and change my election registration. I said, well, the DMV is working very closely with the election rolls, and they tell, if your driver's license matches and your last 4 of your social, they're probably going to put the 2 together.
And the import of that to the county clerk's office is, did you say 375 different ballots?
307.
Well,
Yeah,
this gentleman,
crazy.
this gentleman has a ballot that his wife got. The one in Los Olivos has a different school board race.
Absolutely.
So he would get a different ballot there.
Yes, and that's one reason why if you're going to vote at a polling place, you should go to your polling place, because they only have so many ballots that are for that area. They wouldn't have the ballots that are for if you wanted to vote in Santa Maria and you lived in Santa Barbara and you go because you work in Santa Maria and you go there. They may not have your local ballot. So even if you mark the offices of all of them, they will have to take your ballot and discount the offices that you voted for in Santa Maria because you don't live there, and you won't have voted for the local offices of where you should have voted. So it's really important that people try to get to their proper precinct voting place if they're going to vote at the polls.
This, to go back, and I think you have some valid criticisms, the federal courts ruled in LA County to clean up there, and then through consent decree, the state of California, and the way they do it here and other places is they send out a little green card. Explain the green card and why it's not really successful, but it's...
Well, first I'm going to say that I became part of the GOP election integrity. I was chair for a while in our county, and we were talking to these chairs in every single of the other counties in California, and we found out, most amazingly, that each county has the ability to do the elections differently. Some counties have all mail-in ballots, no precinct voting. Some counties are still all precinct voting, very few. But we got talking, and we've done this over the last more than a year, and the differences in each county are astounding. It's up to the election commissioner of what happens.
County clerk.
And like Joe Holland has insisted that we keep paper ballots. Thank you, Joe Holland, for doing that. That's a really important process. But what happens with the green cards is before an election, you will probably get a little green card in the mail.
Yeah.
And what it says on it is, if you got this, do nothing. It's fine. It also says, if you didn't get this because you don't live there anymore, let us know. Well, that's opposite of what it should be. It should, and we want to go.
And that's been dictated by the state.
And the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah.
That actually could be changed by the Board of
really?
Supervisors. And so we will go after this election and see if those green cards can't say, if you got this, if it's correct, send it back to us so we will put you as being active and correct on the voter rolls.
But those are addressed to the voter.
They're addressed to the voter.
So if you're in an apartment and you get one of those because the person 2 years ago was a registered voter there, Jack Holland told me you should not at this address and send it back.
But how many people do that?
Yeah.
And especially students at Ivy. But I have talked to people who have gotten 8, 10 cards of prior people who are there, and then you think to yourself, oh my gosh, a ballot is following that green card. What is going on? I did look at the website to see which counties in California have more registered voters than registered people that could possibly be voters. And Santa Barbara County is not one of them, thank goodness, but San Diego County leads the list with 138% more registrations than possible voters. And that should be an absolute red flag. And that wasn't 2020 data. So we have a lot of work to do because everybody who really wants fair and above board elections wants it to be one qualified legal voter and one vote.
Yeah. Well, I think Isla Vista still is 104% of the population in registered voters. Now on election day, they don't vote, they vote their 80-90% like everyone else, but
Isla Vista, it's a real problem for the universities because you have such a fluid population. And I personally think that unless they are in an apartment, the students in the dorms possibly should be voting where they live, where they go for Christmas and summer break, and where they're going to go back. The biggest problem is if they're pre-registered, as they can be at 16 now, and then go on the voter rolls at 18, they're going to get a ballot back where they were re-registered in high school, and they're probably going to have registered to vote at a university that they're now attending. So that's 2 ballots out there. Yeah. It's a big problem, and we have a lot of work to do.
Joe Holland told me that one of the big issues that is slowly closing was this county's registration wasn't checked against San Francisco's registration.
That is very true.
And he said, even as we're interfacing and getting better at that, we haven't even started on this county's registration. It is an interface with Colorado, Arizona.
Well, there is, I found out there is a database where states can sign up for voter registration verifications and where people move, but they have to pay, and each state legislature has to renew their subscription to this service. And California actually has been a member, but our Secretary of State not only has not done the job of having that hooked up, but so that we look at other states, but not all 50 states are on it. And in our case, in California's case, our Secretary of State for many, many, many years asked for a waiver from the HAVA Act, the Help Americans Vote Act, where everything in each state was supposed to be a statewide database, so voters could be removed from being duplicated, or when they moved, it could be tracked and that sort of thing. California asked for a waiver over and over and over again, so we continued to build these bogus voter rolls of more people than possible voters.
A personal story, I get a text and an email from a congresswoman that covers Sammamish, Issaquah,
Yeah.
Washington. Well, back 15 or 20 years ago, I took my legal residence there because I was there with my family there as much as I was anywhere. About 90 days here, 90 days there, 90 days everywhere else in the country. And so I get a text from this congresswoman wanting me to give input, wanting me to come to a Zoom meeting.
Oh.
Finally, instead of just erasing it, I text back, haven't been a registered voter there for 13 years. But worse than that, 2 years ago, my daughter says, what do I do with a ballot that keeps coming here for you?
Oh, gee.
And
Okay.
I said, you don't vote it, you're a Republican. She said, no, we wouldn't do that, but what do? I said, return it, no longer at this address. I went and talked to Joe Holland, and he said, there's no way we would know.
No,
He
we're
said,
not
you could have
hooked
voted
up.
in both places all this time.
Absolutely, and you think
And
about.
you liberals will do that. Republicans won't.
Well, I'm not going to go that far to say that. Let's hope nobody does. But think about the states that have borders like Indiana and Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee. The river is right there, and people are living in one state, working in another state. They might have a second home in a third state. They are getting ballots, and we know there was a congressman who voted in New York and voted in Florida, and she got caught. This is
Democrat, right?
It was a Democrat, but this is a real problem. And
Yeah.
as much as we don't want a national ID database, we are looking at how do we not have a voter national ID base. And one of the biggest things that would help tremendously is photo ID.
Yeah.
And that does not suppress the vote. I mean, my gosh, you need photo ID to do virtually anything.
Well,
and
you
if
know,
you can't afford it, it's free.
You know, that's racist. They just because they need a voter a ID to get welfare, that doesn't mean that they should have it for voting.
Yeah, no, if we look at the rules that the U.S. has helped implement in countries around the world for voting, we implement stricter rules overseas for their voting systems than we enforce here, which is absolutely ridiculous.
I found it humorous to learn that mail-in ballots, not election day ballots, not an election day cause for an absentee ballot. You know, I'm sick,
Okay.
I'm out of the country, I'm in the service, were prevalent in Germany and France.
Yes.
And they've done away with, and they've required voter ID and election day voting, except in extreme circumstances.
France has gone completely to paper ballots, counted in the precinct, then reported to the headquarters. And no, they found that the fraud was insane. And I've watched the movie 2,000 Mules. I've watched Catherine Engelbrecht withdrew the vote, and Dinesh D'Souza. And from my own personal experience of observing voter fraud, and especially here in California, the ease in which you can do it now, and I'm going to give kudos to our county election staff, because we have had meetings with them and we have pointed out the places where we see holes that are open, and they have taken every step they can to close those holes. I just cannot tell you how great that staff is.
Now,
So-
would it be fair for me with my little camera iPhone if I see a young person at one of these drop-off boxes sticking 20 or 30 ballots in? They're not allowed to gather 20 or 30 ballots, and take a picture?
Well, you
Turn
can,
it over to
you,
the DA?
You could take a picture, but you don't know that what that person is doing is wrong, because they could be dropping off ballots that have been given to them in the neighborhood. That what about they've been collected at a church? There are all sorts of different scenarios that have.
So you still can
but
harvest ballots.
well, harvesting ballots is okay in California. It has now been declared illegal in Delaware, and drop-off boxes for ballots have been declared by the Delaware Supreme Court to be unconstitutional.
With Joe Biden being the favorite son?
I thought
Maybe
that
that's
was
the reason.
ironic. I thought that was very ironic. But it's really a problem when we have all mail voting. We should have all at the precinct in-person voting, except for absentee ballots. There is such an ability of people to get ballots and vote for other people. We see this in nursing homes, we see this in different places, and it's just not right at all.
Yeah.
It is an American, it's your right, it's your duty under the Constitution, if you want to vote. But for there to be ballots out there that people have not gone to the polls and deliberately wanted to use that ballot to vote, we're just mailing willy-nilly. We don't know if the people are still here. We don't know if they've passed away. We don't know anything. And to go to all these different post office boxes, and a ballot can be mailed out of state to you. Legally, it can be mailed in the military overseas.
Forwarded.
It should not be forwarded, but it can be mailed out of county, out of state.
Oh, yeah, because there are citizens.
Yep.
For a while, John McCain was a citizen of the United States, but he was voting in the Panama zone where he was stationed. They tried to keep him from running
the military,
for president.
yeah, and you know, some of the people say, why can't we have the results that night, election night? And I think that until we go back to some sort of paper ballots, we're probably not going to see that. Also, ballots can be put in the mail on election day. They're not going to arrive then.
Yeah.
So there is a reason.
5 days, is it?
They give it way too much time, and they also say for some reason ballots that don't have a postmark on them have to be accepted no matter when they show up.
Oh.
That is crazy.
The problem with the mail-in ballots you've outlined very well, because you really, and you mentioned the voting in rest homes, apartment complexes. How legal is it for me to sit down with somebody and then say, oh, I don't know, tell me how to vote? Is it legal for me to tell them how to vote, or must I tell them what I know?
Well, what the state of California actually has determined is that unless a court of law says you are incompetent to vote, not incompetent to handle your own affairs, but specifically incompetent to vote, you can vote. So it's, if someone cannot fill out their own ballot, but their intent is clear, you could help them fill that out. You could go to the polling station. You're allowed to assist somebody. They can have up to 2 people assisting them in a voting booth. But as far as you filling out a ballot for someone else, of course, that's not what should be happening. But we do know that with parents and elderly people, there's probably a lot of that going on.
The laws are so strict when people are trying to comply with them. We had a candidate filing for an election to the city council in Carpinteria,
Yes.
and her 20th signature was a blind man who went so far as to have somebody notarize
Yep.
that he was the voter.
Yes.
And it was rejected because the procedure is, if you're blind or disabled, you make an X,
Right.
and it's witnessed.
Right.
And so she couldn't get on the ballot because
Right.
of this
It's a write-in
technicality.
candidate, Patty, I think it's Boyd, down in Carpinteria. And anyway, that just seemed to be over the top to not accept that signature. But, you know,
It's the law.
it's the law, and if they had to follow it, they followed it. So
As long as they're
it's-
following it even-handedly.
It just teaches you to make sure you have a couple extra
Got
signatures.
2 minutes. Tell us what you look forward to, what we should be watching for, and tell us how I could end up as a provisional ballot.
Well, if you go into I'll answer that one first. If you go into the voting place without your ballot, and they showed that, so you don't surrender it, and you are going to possibly end up with a provisional ballot if you're not in the right place or you don't have your ballot to surrender, that sort of thing. And on the other thing, I want to get to where you want to go for information on the recommendations. I believe it's going to be shown on the bottom of the screen, but you can go to the county election website, and it's www.countyofsantabarbara.org/164/elections. And you'll have information on where your polling place is, the drop boxes, whatever you want to see there. And if you haven't gotten a ballot, and I did want to say, if you have not gotten your ballot by Saturday, contact the election office immediately. Somebody may have gotten it inadvertently. You don't want that. Also, vote early, get your ballot back in, and you can track your ballot and see that it has been received. And that you go to the Secretary of State. It's sos.ca.gov/elections, ballot status, where's my ballot? You'll find it very easily. So
Another way you can end up as a provisional ballot is if you don't vote right away and somebody else goes in and uses your name to vote, then even though you're the legal voter, it becomes provisional because there's 2 ballots from Jim Worthen.
And your ballot, if somebody has voted as you at the voting place because they haven't received your ballot back and shown that ballot that goes in the box is going to be counted.
Julie,
thank you, Jim.
Thank you for the enlightenment. There's never enough time.
There isn't.
Well, we're
but I
looking forward
appreciate
to
it.
the results of this election.
Okay.